Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I've got a rather interesting firearm on the table. It's a Rock Island Armory. Its name is the Standard FS-HC Combo. The model number on it's 51687. They've got about 9 different varieties of these things. They've got a Target, a Standard, and an Ultra. And the Target has fiber sights, and the Standard, like you see it here, has got an adjustable rear sight, and when I pick it up you'll see, I'll show you the blade front sight, and the Ultra has a flared mag well. But this one is a Standard, and this cartridge, we were aware of its existence, but really hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to it. It's kind of an interesting little thing. It uses a 5.56 case as the parent case, and then it's shortened and necked down. The body of it is actually 9mm diameter, so this is the same size as a 9mm in diameter, and of course the bullet itself is about 5.57, so it's a 22 caliber bullet, and it's a 40 grain bullet. There are not very many varieties of this ammo. Basically it's this one. It's made by one company, Armscore, and they're also the parent company of Rock Island Armory that makes the gun. So the ammo and the guns are a little difficult to find. Most gun stores don't have them. And the ammo itself is like 25 bucks a box online, and then if you buy it in bulk you can get it down around 20 bucks. And one thing that's unique about it, it's got 22 in the name, 22 TCM, but it's not a rimfire, it's a centerfire. The other thing that's unique about this, the combo part of the name of this, is the gun will fire 2 different calibers. It'll fire the 22 TCM, which I have the 22 TCM barrel in it at the moment, and it'll also fire 9mm with the 9mm barrel. Now, depending on which model you get, you may have to buy this barrel as an accessory, but if you buy the combo kit, you'll get the barrel with it. My thought on it is, if you're wanting the 9mm, buy the combo kit. Stuff for this is real hard to get a hold of. So let me flick the safety off. Before I go any further, show you we do have an unloaded 22 TCM. Now the magazine, which unfortunately I only get one of, is a steel mag, and it will hold either the 22 TCM or the 9mm, and it holds 17 rounds. So you notice it's a double stack, and I've got a 1911 in my hand. If you look underneath it, you'll see the grips themselves are relatively thin. It's got a very large mag well, and that gives you the enhanced capacity, but it's only slightly thicker than a standard standard 1911. It's about 0.1 inches thicker. When we get into the dimensions, we'll talk about that. Now, one disappointing feature of this magazine, there's no witness holes. So you load it till it stops taking ammo and you shoot it till it clicks. But other than that, you really don't have any way of picking one of these mags up and seeing what its state is. So the length and the width and height of this, it's a full-size 1911 basically. And it's a 70 series. But it's 8.5 inches front to back, it's 5.5 inches tall, and it's 1.41 inches thick. Now by comparison, and I'll put it up a little bit later in the video, I'll show you, by comparison the Springfield 1911, the 9mm we've got is 1.31 inches. So it's about a tenth of an inch thicker than a standard 1911, but the rest of the dimensions are roughly the same. This particular version has a steel frame and a steel slide, so it weighs 2.6 pounds. They don't even bother with ounces on the site, they just go straight to pounds. They do have a variation that has an aluminum frame, it's a little bit lighter, and as I mentioned, they've got one with an extended mag well. Now, one important point, there's 2 different magazines that you can get for this gun, an A and a B version. This is the A version gun without the mag well. The B version has a flared mag well and has a different base plate. The magazines are not interchangeable, so you want to make sure you get the one that matches the gun that you happen to have picked. The sights on this, the rear sight is actually quite nice. It's a fully adjustable height and windage using simple screw drive. 2-dot sight. The front sight's a little disappointing. You're seeing a nice bright white dot on this one, but it didn't come with that. It came with a black blade, and when we first took it out with that black blade, we couldn't hit anything with it. So you can see, actually it's not even perfect, but I painted a dot on it. And that dot is actually enabled us to at least see the sights. We have looked into replacing the sights with maybe a fiber optic or something like that, but the dimensions, even though they are dovetailed front and rear, the dimensions they use are kind of non-standard, so I'm having a little difficulty finding a front sight to replace that with. Now the cool thing is I could replace just the front sight with a fiber and not have to worry about the gun being off because of the adjustable rear sight. It's got a few other features. It's got a skeletonized hammer. It's got a skeletonized trigger with over travel stop, and I haven't had to adjust the over travel stop on it, but that is there. It is adjustable. Typical 1911, there's no rail, there's no front serrations, you just have the serrations at the back. And it has a 5-inch barrel. Now from a safety perspective, this is a 70 series, so it doesn't have an internal drop safety, but it does have the grip safety typical of a 1911 and a nice long extended beaver tail. You're not going to get hammer bit by this at all. And it has your typical 1911 thumb safety, but only on one side. From a carry standpoint, this gun's a little big and a little heavy to be a popular carry gun, but it is a very nice range gun or home defense gun. Notice it's got a smooth front strap and a checkered back strap and checkered grips. It's actually really comfortable to hold. We never at any point felt like this thing was going to jump out of our hands, especially because with the 22 TCM there's next to no recoil. And even with 9mm and a 2.6 pound gun, there's really not any recoil to speak of. Now, a couple things that you may want to know about these grips. They're a nice solid material, but if you have intent to change them, you're going to run into a few issues. You see this little cover plate here that covers part of the grip safety mechanism? Looks like it's part of the gun. It's actually not. It's part of the grip. The other thing that we ran into, because we did buy a set of grips on this just to make it more interesting, you'll see it on this side here, and you also see that this notch and the hole centers of the grip are a little different than a standard 1911. So we bought some kind of cool 1911 grips, went to put them on and realized we'd have a big ugly gap here that stuff could get into. This I was going to have to machine so that when you hit the magazine release and it protruded, it wouldn't hang up on the grip, and the hole centers were off. So the grips that come with it are nice grips. Those are pretty much the grips that are going to be on it, unless you can find a company that makes grips for this gun with those little extra hooks and etc., etc. So it's not really a heavily customizable gun. From a parts perspective, not all the parts are standard 1911, even though it is a 1911 design. You'll see as I get it apart, there are several different things in there that are unique to this design of the gun. The sights being kind of non-standard sizes, pretty much the gun this is the way it's going to be. And unless you find that Rock Island starts making accessories for it. Taking this thing apart and putting it back together is actually fairly easy. It's just like any other 1911. So of course you want to make sure it's clear, because you are going to be looking right down the business end of it at one point. Flick the safety on, and the whole reason for flicking the safety on is it keeps the slide from moving as you take it apart. It does have a full-length guide rod, which you'll see when I get it apart, but it has a hollow center to the bushing, so that it's real easy to get it apart without having to do tools. You just push down on it with a thumb or a tool enough to slide it out of the way, lift up because of course it's under spring tension, and then slide the barrel bushing back the other way, pull the barrel bushing out, and you've got it apart. So it's one of the few full-length guide rods that I found that I actually liked, because with this design it makes it easy to work with it. Turn the safety off. Now, most 1911s have a very clearly defined, loop out in the actual slide. That's easy to see, so it's easy to line up. This one doesn't. You'll see it's kind of just a very tiny little loop there that's really hard to see. So you just kind of have to line that up in order to be able to push it out, and it is a little bit difficult to see it. Pull the takedown lever out. Slide the gun apart. Before I go into the slide, the frame itself is pretty much standard 1911. It's got nice robust rails. You got the hammer back here. There's no extra parts in here because this is the 70 series, so it doesn't have a drop safety. And a full-length rod or guide on the other side. So it's pretty much typical 1911. The slide, get the spring out of here. There's your full-length guide rod. Nice heavy steel guide rod, and we'll take the barrel out. The barrels between the two look identical other than the stamping on the side and the flare at the front. The 22 TCM has this bull barrel, and of course if you look down the chamber you're going to see it looks kind of interesting, because you've got a nice round chamber and then a much smaller diameter barrel. The other thing I noticed that's a little different, there's a shroud around the barrel lug. And that can be a little hassle when it goes to putting it back together. You sometimes have to wiggle it to get this to come out in the open so that you can catch it. But other than that, I haven't had any function issues related to that. It's just a unique design. Nice, highly polished feed ramp. It's kind of steep. Now, one thing we did find with this, when we first took it to the range, we got through about 100 or so rounds flawlessly. And then once we got a little past 100 rounds first time out, we started having fails to feed that would hang up on the ramp. And I think it's because two things. One, I do believe there's going to be a break-in period. If you look, there's numerous areas of wear around the barrel and the barrel shroud and along the sides here. So I think it needs to kind of wear itself in a little bit. Of course, that'll slow down the cycle. And also, as it got dirty, when you combine it with the tighter tolerances, that resulted in some issues. We cleaned it, took it back out again, and had no further issues with the 22 TCM. So expect a kind of a short break-in period with it. Let me get my little light thing so I can light up the barrel for you. You'll see it is conventional rifling. And one thing that's kind of unique on this end, and the 22 TCM barrel kind of looks like a cannon because it's got this big fat barrel with a tiny hole in it. So it kind of looks like the business end of a cannon. And at the range, it kind of acts like a cannon. It makes a huge fireball and a lot of noise, but almost no recoil. Let me grab the 9mm barrel and put them side by side. You can see if you didn't look at the stampings and you didn't notice the bull barrel at the end, they pretty much look the same. They've got very similar feed ramps. TCM feed ramp's a little narrower because of the smaller bullet. And then I'll show you the 9mm bore as well. Standard rifling as well. And it has more of a conventional muzzle end rather than that cannon-y look that the 22 TCM has. The other thing I'll show you that's kind of different are the springs. So it comes with two springs, and the real difference you'll notice is the length. The 22 TCM spring is a little bit longer and it's significantly lighter. The 9mm spring is shorter and heavier. You do have to put the right spring in. If you put the wrong spring in, it won't function either way. In the 22 TCM, if you put the 9mm spring in, it won't cycle properly. And if you put the 22 TCM spring in shooting 9mm, you're going to beat the gun up. It's not going to stop the slide. The slide's going to bottom out before it can stop. I had started to paint this to identify the two because they come just completely black. And I did that before I realized there was a difference in length. So as this paint wears off, I'm not going to replenish it because you really don't need to. The length difference is enough to kind of call it out for you. So set the springs aside, make sure I keep the TCM spring for putting it back together. And we'll talk about the slide. The slide's actually very simple. Just like any 70 Series 1911, there's really not much going on in there. It's a very standard looking 1911 design. Nice thick rails. It's actually well machined and smooth. So overall the gun is well done. Rock Island Armory, they do make good quality parts, good quality guns. Their name isn't as well known. They're not out there like Springfield and Colt and Dan Wesson. But they do make very high quality guns, and they do tend to be reliable. Other than this initial break-in period, I'm expecting this thing to work fine. And I will note we did 22 TCM first, took it home, cleaned it, took it back out with 9mm. It ran flawlessly with 9mm, cleaned it, and then took it back out with 22 TCM and had no issues with it. You do get a little bit of ejected cases hitting, kind of scuffing things up. I could polish that off, but over time, eventually I would wear the finish down if I did. So I'm just going to leave that the way it is. It's not hurting anything. It's not damaged, and it's not pitted or anything. It's just from the cases hitting it. Reassembly on this is actually quite easy. It's no different than any other 1911. The other thing that I'll note is configuring this for a different caliber is easy as dropping the right barrel and recoil spring in. There's nothing else to change. You don't have to change the extractor tension or the ejector or any of the other parts. You just drop in the right barrel and of course the right spring. So I'm going to go ahead and put the spring on, and one thing you want to make sure of is that you have the closed end of the spring facing the end of the guide rod and the open end out at the muzzle. Otherwise you'll have difficulty with it hanging up as you do it. Then I'm going to take the frame and just slide it on. Now sometimes you will have it hang up a little bit and you have to kind of jiggle it, and that's not unusual. And then once I've got the frame in, I'm going to wiggle it back and forth till I see the barrel lug through there and capture it. I may have to wiggle it a little bit to capture it. So now I've captured it. And now it's time to snap it in place. And here's the point: we have to be careful so you don't get the infamous idiot scratch up along here. And also, unlike a normal 1911, there's a bulge here. So you kind of have to lift up and around it. But the first thing I'm going to do is line up that little cutout, which is kind of difficult to see, and then bring the arm up, line it up, snap it in. Make sure it goes all the way in. At this point, put the safety on and put it muzzle end up so that you can now put the barrel bushing on and the spring. Now this part here, you push it down just a little bit and slide it forward and you'll see it catches it. So it allows you to do it in two steps, one with your thumb, finger or whatever you're using completely over it, and then you have to kind of use either a thumbnail or a tool to slide it the rest of the way around. Safety off, and we're back in operation. While I've got it at this point, I'm going to go ahead and show you the trigger. One thing too I'll note, the Rock Island Armory logo on the newer ones is just a nice kind of a real neat low profile logo at the back. Some of the older ones had, a rather large logo across here. They don't look quite as nice, so depending on which version or age of the version you get. Now as far as the trigger goes, it comes in around the 5-pound range, a hair of take-up, and then a nice short crisp break. And then of course it's a 1911, so when it cycles, there's not really any reset other than just bringing it back out to the same place you would have brought it out if it was initially firing. It's a very standard 1911 trigger. It's not quite as light as some 1911 triggers, but it's every bit as crisp as you'd want. And we found that we had no trouble with keeping this on target with the trigger. There you go, another very short break. So the trigger actually works quite well, and it allowed us to get nice quick follow-up shots. The fact that there's almost no recoil with 22 TCM, especially in this gun, made it real easy to keep it on target. And the other thing that we found with this was kind of fun is you get a huge fireball and a big bang. So it sounds like you lit off a 454 Kazoo and you get this big plasma ball. So the first mag we ran through this thing, when I was done, put the gun down, turned around, and the entire range was standing behind me. Everybody was wanting to know what the thing was that we were shooting. So it was actually quite a bit of fun to shoot this thing and draw some attention. Now, one thing I had mentioned on a size perspective, I have this Springfield 1911 9mm, and you've seen a previous review on this gun. When you set them side by side, the footprint's almost identical from a length, and when you set them side by side, a height perspective. So it's basically the 1911 size. But you notice there's a significant difference in the mag wells. You can see that the single stack standard 1911 versus the double stack magazine, but you'll notice the grips are a lot thicker on the Springfield, and they're really kind of a thin little blade on this one. So that's how it kind of ends up making it where it's not all that much bigger for your hand. And you can see too that on a standard 1911 the frame is pretty much straight across, and on here it's narrow at the back and then flares out. Interestingly enough, the width at the back from here to here on these two guns is almost identical. Now when I set them side by side, the overall grip thickness measured just below the grip safety is 1.41 on the TCM and 1.31 on the Springfield 1911, and that might vary depending on what grips you've got on the 1911. So it's about a 0.1 inch overall grip thickness difference between the two, and front to back they're the same. So when you're holding this gun in your hand, it's not like you're holding onto a big old monster. Now, I had mentioned early on that it wasn't until we did the 5.7 versus 22 Magnum review that this cartridge really took interest to us, because there were a whole lot of comments, people saying, well, can you compare it to a 22 TCM? Well, we've got a 22 TCM, and we're going to do that comparison. So we're going to compare the 5.7, the three different versions of the 5.7, to the 22 TCM, give you the range footage and everything else. So that you asked for it, you got it, and notice it has TCM up here. So watch for that upcoming video where we do that comparison. And when we did 22 Magnum versus the 5.7, there was a significant difference in velocity for the 5.7, which translates to a significant difference in energy. We'll look to see if we get that same difference or close between the TCM and the 22 Magnum. So if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, Subscribe. If you do, click that bell so you get notified when we put something out. Check us out on Facebook and Patreon, and have a great day. Thank you.